Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 11:17 on the 31st of March 2025, and it's been a glorious morning. I've had two glorious mornings, so I thought I would bring us outside and we'd sit under the trees and in the sunshine. It's very still, not a breath of wind, not even a tiny little zephyr, and it's just magical, another magical day. So I thought I would continue reading. I'm just going to get a cushion because I'm sitting on a chair that's sunken to the wet ground and I'm sunken down and my tuchus hurt. So I'm just going to get a cushion. Be right back. That's better. It didn't feel too uncomfortable when I first sat down, but it started pressing on the ass bones, and I don't like things pressing on my ass. Just saying. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, so I thought I would continue reading Healing Angels, Part 2 from True Tales of Angel Encounters. And yes, I decided to do it outside and get some fresh air, and I'm sort of a bit out of the sun because of my proclivities to sprout skin cancers, but it's just lovely out here. Can you hear the baby bird? I'll go quiet. He's gone quiet just when I said, can you hear him? Anyway, there's a young bird making little sweet little baby noises, and it's all very lovely, isn't it? Is it not, people of Earth? Right, anyway, let us continue. Nerese, 56, Maine, USA. I got pneumonia once when I was staying in Manhattan. It was ironic because it was a really hot June, but I caught it from the air conditioning. Apparently, it's quite a common cause. You come in out of the heat into this cold air, and if your lungs are a bit weakened by a cold or infection, you just start getting water on the lungs. I felt worse and worse, and then I fainted in Macy's and ended up in the hospital. They were very good and diagnosed me right away. I spent a couple of nights there, quite ill, on heavy antibiotics. Then, on the third day, I felt a bit better and asked if I could leave. The doctors were quite doubtful and made me sign all kinds of disclaimers. They also wanted to know if I had someone to look after me, and I said I did, even though I didn't. Clearly I wasn't okay. I suppose it was a bit pig-headed of me. I was just so sick of the hospital, and I felt better, so I thought I'd be fine. I was staying at the New Yorker Hotel near Penn Station. By the time I got there in the taxi, I was feeling really weak and already realising I'd probably been a bit too keen to get out. It was quite surreal because it was this beautiful weather outside. I was up on the 20th floor with a lovely view out over Manhattan and the river, and the room was sweltering hot because I'd had to turn off the air conditioning so it wouldn't make me worse. And I just lay there in bed, looking out at the view, sweating and shivering. I passed out more than fell asleep. All night I was feverish and my chest hurt terribly. I took as many painkillers as I could, and still I felt terrible. Along toward dawn, I was drifting in and out of sleep and having strange dreams. The thing I remember is that every time I started to fall asleep or woke up, I saw the room as it was, but with two shimmering figures, one either side of my bed. Their faces were impassive. They looked half real, as though they were partly in this world and partly somewhere else. Every time I woke up, I saw them there, and then they melted away as I woke up properly, and every time I fell asleep, they were the last thing I saw before I went to sleep. I'm not sure if they were helping me or if they were simply there, visible to me, because I was so ill. The next day, I was still in a terrible fever, but I managed to eat a bit and make it through the day. That night was exactly the same, with the vision of the two angels there, constant throughout the night. The day after that, I managed to get up. I went back to the hospital, and without exactly saying, "I told you so," they pointed out that I was actually worse than when I'd checked myself out. They gave me some injections and kept me in for another couple of days. I stopped seeing the figures then, and finally started to get better. I always wonder who they were. Did they come because I was ill, or are they always there, but invisible to me? I guess I'll never know, not in this life, anyway. You just reach around, just got to get my drink of water. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it. I've got all my computer equipment squeezed on this small little table and there's no room for the water. I know, I'll bring another chair over. Actually, no, I've brought the other little table over. The little tiny little French bistro tables that my friends Peter and Lynn gave me. They're very sweet, but they're tiny. Anyway, I've made it work now. Work to my advantage. Clever mama tea. Sometimes. Takes me a while to click on that I needed that, is what I mean. Right, I'm a bit short of breath the last 2 days, which is a concern that my asthma's playing up. Anyway, watching the lorikeets, little scaly-breasted lorikeet up the top of the tulip tree, the African tulip trees, strutting their stuff. It's so still in the garden, so very, very still. If it weren't for the birds and the little noises they're making, it would be a bit eerie actually. Thank the gods for birds. Alison, 47, Manchester, England. I was addicted to sleeping pills and painkillers a few years ago. I wasn't very happy at the time, and I had been using more and more drugs to try and make myself better, but really it was only making things worse. And I had enough sense to realise I was harming myself, and I resolved to give them up. But rather than cut down gradually, I decided that the only way was to stop them all immediately. Dangerous thing to do, people of Earth. Dangerous. My mother was addicted to Mogadon, sleeping pills, diet pills, diazepam, Valium. She had uppers and downers all fucking day. I still remember being 7, watching her tearing her hair out, literally almost at its roots, like Lee Remick, I think it was, that played that character in the movie Requiem for a Dream. I looked at that character and I immediately realised it was my mother when I was 7, 1972. And I freaked out because that was my childhood too, watching that creature spiralling up and down in various forms of madness, knocking herself down with sleeping pills and unwittingly speeding herself up with diet pills. But she didn't even end up getting all that slim. And then she kind of realised one day, gnashing and grinding her teeth and tearing at her hair, just like that character in that movie, she turned to me and with deep insight and clarity she said to me, "You're not, darling. These pills are not doing me any good. I'm not even getting slim, and I can't sleep, and I'm agitated all day long." I just folded my little 7-year-old arms, nodded sagely, and she did wean off the pills, but by the gods, what a nightmare it was for all of us, my father and myself as well, living with her and her major addiction. And yet she would always, my father and her would always imprint on me, don't ever do drugs, don't ever do drugs, drugs are bad, not realising that they liked their alcohol a bit too much, and my mother had a major prescription drug addiction at that time. I wonder what angel gave her the clarity of thought to realise that it was killing her, whether it was just her higher mind. But anyway, it kind of saved her, I guess. Thank the goddess. She calmed down a bit after she left my father and met Case, because Case was very calm and mellow and didn't buy into her histrionic bullshit like my father used to. They would just spiral into like writhing demons, into some kind of catastrophe constantly on a daily basis, whereas Case would just go walk off. Which was interesting because both my father and Case were Pisces, and but anyway, my dad had his own trauma issues from his childhood, so they literally bounced off each other, him and my mother, all fucking day long. It was like living in a constant maelstrom of psychic energy and rage and distress and button pushing. My mother button pushed all day long. Oh, anyway, what made me think of that ugliness? Oh yes, this lady saying she had to wean off her pills. Well, she didn't, and that was foolish. I tipped a few bottles of pills down the sink and threw out all the packets in one go. I later realised that this was quite risky and foolhardy. Any doctor seeing what I was taking would have recommended that I go off the drugs gradually. The withdrawal effects, particularly from the sleeping pills, were quite bad. I started to get fluttery heart rhythms and hot flushes. My blood pressure was very low, and I would get unpredictably dizzy when I stood up. I don't suppose it's anything like as bad as the withdrawal from more serious drug addictions, but it was pretty unpleasant nonetheless. I had a very unpleasant experience. They call it tapering off now instead of withdrawing, but you're really withdrawing. Tapering off all my psych meds in early June, May to early June 2000. 16. I did it in 1 month, and my psychiatrist had advised that I do it over 2 months. But I was determined. I wanted that shit out of my body. I considered it poison shit. Hadn't done anything to assist with my depression, my complex PTSD, and I was dragging myself through life, twitching and drooling and Parkinsonian symptoms at one stage as well. And I just wanted it out of me. Wow, I was so ill for that month. I did nothing but shat and shat and shat and shat. Because at the same time I weaned off this gastro stop that I'd been on for many years with my IBS. Wow, after a while I thought, I'm having similar withdrawal symptoms to a heroin addict. So I googled what's in gastro stop, and what's its pharmaceutical name? Can't remember now. But I got quite a shock to discover that there's 2%, only 2%, a tiny amount. That's probably what calms your bloody bowels down. Just literally sedates you from the inside. Your bowels, not you, but not your mental state, but your bowels, which is a second brain in a way. Anyway, that fucking medication, which is an over-the-counter medication, and I've been on for many, many years, has 2% morphine in it. So I went to my friend, my former friend, who had been a heroin addict. She was constantly on the methadone program, so technically she was still kind of an addict because she was still having to support herself on methadone. And occasionally she'd bust too. Poor darling. I really had a lot of compassion for that girl because she went into heroin from the age of 14 after a terrible abduction of a serial killer and survived it. Should technically not have survived that event. He had killed 8 other children. But anyway, she got into bad company and they got her hooked up on the fucking smack. Would you believe it? As if she hadn't already been through enough shit in her life by the time she was 14. Anyway, that girl loved me. Why did she love me? Because I accepted her unconditionally. Oh, she would get savage when she was back on the gear. She would call me a cunt and all sorts of awful names, and I'd just stare at her and I'd be like, I wouldn't push it too far, my girl. You're pushing it a bit far with me. When you cross the line, you'll lose me forever. I'll never fucking speak to you or your mother or your sister or your daughter ever again. Took a lot for me to cut ties with that entire family. Anyway, where was I going with that? So I went to her when I was weaning off. Oh, that's interesting, because I cut ties to her mother in February 2015, but I must have still had some, yes, I did, that is correct. I still stayed in contact with the heroin addicted daughter for about a year after, till I realised she was getting me to drive her around late at night, and I was suspicious she was manipulating and using me so she could get back on the shit, and which I could not support. I spent, years supporting her mother to try and keep her daughter off the heavy drugs, off the heroin. But anyway, I went to her and said, I won't name her. I have mentioned her name in the past, but I won't mention her name. Let's have a little bit of fucking privacy and decorum. Sometimes I blurt things out unwittingly, and not being malicious, but just that's their name and that's how I know them. But anyway, I went to this younger woman and I said to her, I'm having terrible trouble coming off this gastro stop and all my psych meds. She said, what are your symptoms? I said, I'm sweating, and I'm shitty, and I'm very, very fucking ill. I said, I've just looked at what's in the gastro stop. And she said, morphine. I said, how did you know that? She said, I know that. She said, I've had to take it too. She said, yeah, they put morphine in it. It does something to the, I can't think of a word. But anyway, in the lining of your gut. She said it literally sedates it. That's why you don't have constant fucking diarrhea, and it holds you together a bit more. But she said, what you're going through, Tanya, is exactly what a heroin addict goes through, only a bit more intense because of the higher dosages. But she said, think about it. She said, been taking that medication for 15 years. Suddenly you're going off it. Your body's gone into shock because, she said, that's why you're having full-blown withdrawal symptoms, just like a heroin addict. I freaked out. I said, why would you even do that to yourself? I said, why do you keep going back on that drug when you know how awful it is coming off it? She says, because it feels good when you're on it, Tanya. And we just want to feel good because our lives are so awful and our mental state is so compromised, and it's the only way we can feel good about anything. Smiled at me sagely. She said, I don't know how you, she used to call me Auntie, I don't know how you, Auntie, never went into it actually, given your childhood. I said, I was programmed to never do drugs, ever. I said, I should not even have gone and accepted the psych meds, but at that time I was very, very ill and I thought it was the right thing to do. And then I kind of became a bit dependent on them, thinking that I could never go off them because that's what your doctors tell you, that you'll be on them for life. Anyway, the long and the short and the tall of that story is I went off my psych meds and my wonderful psychiatrist said, I will review you in 2 months and I will decide in my professional capacity, if you're not doing well, whether we put you back on them or not. And I said, okay, I just want to have a break. And he said, yes, it's okay to have a break and flush them out from time to time. He said, we actually encourage that actually. He said, but you've never had a break from them in many, many years. So he said, let's just have a look at you. And I think it was 3 months to go to that. To do the review on the withdrawal, because I saw him every 2 weeks as per normal, because of my high risk of suicide ideation, because of my damage from 3 strangulations and my awful childhood. I can swing very dramatically into that headspace, and so it is kind of a risk factor. It's why I'm still in therapy after 30 fucking years, 14 with this wonderful doctor. Anyway, he looked at me, this was back in 2016, so 8 years ago, and he said to me, Tanya, going off those psych meds was the best thing you ever did. I have never seen you so well. If anything, he said, you're flying like an eagle and I expected you to go into full-blown collapse. He said, I'm so proud of you, and I now realise, he said, you're treatment resistant. That's why none of the medications that we put you on over the many, many years ever worked on you. I said, what does that mean? He said, oh, it's just the way your brain's wired from all the cumulative trauma as a child and as a young woman. He said, it's just you. Anyway, it's astonishing. But here I am, 2016, so 9 years later, medication free. Apart from when I need a bit of Ventolin, for my asthma, and steroids for my asthma if it gets bad. And I take my little folic acid for my hyperhomocysteine, and 3 vitamin Ds every day, because during the COVID epoch, Dr. John Campbell recommended that most people are depleted in vitamin D, and that's why they get so dreadfully sick. And since I've been taking the vitamin D for the last 5 years, I don't get as sick as often. I mean, I get other issues that come and go, like my gut's still a bit tickety-boo, a bit precarious. And I get asthma, but I don't get colds and flus as often. It's quite astonishing. I used to constantly be bloody sick with that. So there you go, people are there. And sometimes when my gut's giving me hell, I think about going back on the gastro stop, and then I just shake my head and go, no, I just have to be careful with what I eat and relax and calm down, because a lot of it's anxiety related too, stress related, and not be reliant on medications, because most of it's not that good for you, and it's peddled to us like lollies, knowing full well that the long-term effects are dangerous. Anyway, this young woman writes, well, she wasn't all that young. She's writing it when she's 47, so I don't know how old she was. She said a few years ago, so there you go. She writes, my blood pressure was very low and I would get unpredictably dizzy when I stood up. I don't suppose it's anything like as bad as the withdrawal from more serious drug addictions, but it was pretty unpleasant nonetheless. After 2 days, I felt a little better and went out to the market. But I started to feel terrible while I was there. I was extremely pale and sweating profusely, and I felt like I might faint. I sat down on a low wall just so I wouldn't faint. At that moment, a man passed with a tray of jewellery he was about to set up and start selling. He stopped beside me and started rummaging around inside a shoulder bag. He brought out a little golden angel figure and gave it to me. He said, I think you'll need this. If you're feeling bad, hold on to it. And then he just kept walking. I had nothing to lose, so I held the angel in my hand. Gradually my heart stopped racing and I started to feel a bit better. After that, every time I felt bad, I took the angel out and held it until I felt better. And it really seemed to be helping me somehow. It took a few weeks before the symptoms really went away, and it was a difficult time, but the angel helped. Whenever I held it, I had an image in my head of a big angel figure. It just held me in its arms and rocked me from side to side until I felt okay. I found that very soothing. I went to the doctor later on and told him what I'd done. He said that while he was very pleased that I had managed to get off the medication, I'd been a bit stupid to do it without medical supervision, which is probably true, but at least I had a bit of help along the way. My friend Lynn Sloan will do that, buy random little gifts, like either a crystal or, little Buddha or little angels or little tiny little trinkets, And she will do that. She'll go up to strangers and she'll say, you need this, and give it to them. She's very intuitive and tapped in, and it's always just the most perfect thing too for that person in that moment. Sometimes it freaks them out because they'll be total strangers. So she's very gifted. She's an earth angel. One time she came to visit me about a year or so ago. And I can always tell when she's tapped into the spirit world or the higher realms. She gets a very kind of strange look on her face. And she looked at me and she said, I've been to a special marine shop, she says. I said, oh, have you? She said, yes. They had the most interesting little gadgets and things. She likes to collect unusual, quirky gadgets, spy equipment, all sorts of strange things. She said, they have interesting things in there. She said, and I came across this torch. And uncharacteristically, because she doesn't usually discuss how expensive the gifts are that she gives to me or others, she doesn't normally mention the financial cost. She gave me another funny little look and she said, and I want to tell you, she said, it was very expensive for a torch. I said, why did you do that, Lynn? I didn't ask you to buy me a torch, but if you need me to give you the money for it, I'm happy to reimburse you. No, she said, I bought it for you as a gift, and I want you to have it, and I want you to use the bloody thing. But Lynn, I said, but Lynn, I don't wish to sound ungrateful, but I have a torch on my iPhone. She smiled at me indulgently. Yes, Tanya, but what happens when the iPhone battery dies and you don't have a torch then? I said, oh, well, I just go to bed and go to sleep. No, she said, there may come a time when you need a bloody torch, and I've bought you an excellent torch. It's got a very high, long range, and it's very powerful. It's only a small little thing, but it is indeed very powerful. And she says, and that way, in an emergency, if the power goes out, you can go around and check around the house and garden. And I will feel better about it, because I worry about you there on your own and what could happen to you. And you're not even equipped with basic survival equipment, Tanya. And I just giggled. I said, I'm okay. I have my angels. Because I'm a little bit magical thinking and deluded like that sometimes. I mean, I do have my angels, this is true, but it's important to have practical things covered for too, as well. So anyway, she looked at me quite sternly. Well, now you have a torch, and nodded. I looked at her, I thought, she's in a feisty bloody mood and agitated about this torch, and I feel quite stripped to pieces, being told off for being slack and unprepared and acopic. Anyway, I didn't question or argue any further. I took the torch from her hand and I said, okay, Lynn, you know best. Yes, she says, I do know best. So we proceeded. We sit in the garden here together under my frangipani trees. She smokes and drinks coffee, milk, and I sip tea. So we proceeded with our afternoon, convivial, congenial friendship, chatting as we do, often about spiritual topics. And then almost as suddenly and almost in equally an agitated state as she arrived, she said, I've got to go now, bye. I looked at her, I thought, well, okay then. And she abruptly left. 1 hour later, it had gotten dark. 1 hour later, a storm blew up almost out of nowhere and the power went out. And I did indeed get to utilise the brand new torch she'd bought me. And I sat there scratching my head. How did she know that there was a storm coming and the power was going to go out? I hadn't, normally I'm very attuned to when storms are coming. I'm normally the one that predicts it sometimes a week or so ahead. But that one caught me by surprise. I was a little bit suspicious by how agitated my friend was though, but the storm really caught me by surprise. Anyway, I rang her. Lynn, yes Tanya, the power went out, didn't it? I said, how did you know? I knew, I was told. Buy Tanya a torch, the power's going to go out, she needs that torch. And I said, I'll never second guess you again, Tanya. I'll never second guess you again, Lynn. And she laughed and laughed. She says, what? You mean you second guess me? I went, sometimes. She says, well, there you go. Now you know. When my angels tell me to give you something, sometimes, she said, I have caught you looking at me a little bit funny. She says, now you know that I'm being given accurate information that was needed in that moment in time. And I nodded. Anyway, for a long time, somehow, I don't know why, I lost the bloody torch in the house. I found it recently again, just before the cyclone hit. But anyway, she rang me a few times in that last year. Have you found that torch I bought you? The very expensive torch I bought in the marine shop. No, Lynn, but I know it's safe. I know it's in the house. I've put it somewhere safe that I deem will be easy to find in an emergency. But because of my brain, the way it's wired, I can't bloody remember where the safe place was. It could be anywhere in the house. Have you even looked for it properly, she said. She knows what I'm a bit like. I can be a bit fake, off with the pixies. I said, I have actually. I've pulled every cupboard door, I've pulled everything open, I've looked everywhere. I said, I've almost considered buying a replacement for it. Don't do that, she says. I just want you to find it, 'cause you need it, and you've got it there. Yes, yes, Mama Lynn. I said to her, I call her Mama Lynn sometimes, 'cause she takes on the role of being my mother. Sometimes a little bit of a stern parent at times, not as psychotic or vicious as my parents were. We wouldn't be friends anymore, but every now and then she pulls me up on my bullshit. You know, because we all have bullshit as humans, everyone does. So anyway, can you believe my astonishment? Not long before Cyclone Alfred hit, I thought, I must find that torch. It's crucial now. I'm going to really need it. It has to be somewhere really obvious, because I would have put it thinking this will be easy to put my hand on in an emergency. So I was sitting on my couch staring at was originally my mother's antique inlaid credenza, and I'm just staring at it. I thought, why am I staring at that cupboard all of a sudden? I mean, it's directly opposite where I sit on the couch and my TV's on top of it. But I knew the way I was staring at it with intention, something was telling me, go and look in there. So I did. I opened the front doors of that cupboard, credenza, and would you believe you could have struck me down with lightning? That very expensive torch bought for me by Lynn for my protection was sitting right on the middle shelf of that cupboard. Now, I've looked in that cupboard over the past year probably a dozen times looking for that torch. So it was a bit bizarre that it was sitting there and I had never seen it there. It's like when my silver scraps came back to me recently, from which I made my new Kalaka earring Sacred Hearts. It's odd how it just disappeared and then reappeared just when I needed it. So I took the torch out and I rang Lynn. Mama Lynn, yes Tanya, that bloody torch you bought for me. Did you find it? I said, yes. Where did you find it? She said, it's been missing for a year. It's even annoyed me because I bought it for you specifically. I said, wow, you could strike me down with a feather. But I found it in the credenza, opening the doors. And it's so obvious why I put it there. I would have thought it's near the front door. If I go and there's power while I'm watching TV, I can go straight there and put my hand on it. It's perfectly logical why I put it there. I said, however, I completely forgot it was there and didn't see it when I searched for it before, which is odd. So I now have that little torch beside my bed in the drawer beside. I've got a little Asian style cabinet with 4 drawers that I keep beside my bed because I thought the most logical place is if I lose power during the night in a cyclone, I can put my hand straight on that torch. It's right next to my CPAP machine and it's right next to where I put my phone when I go to sleep at night, so I won't lose it this time. So that's the story about the torch. But Lynn is so psychic and gifted that she will just randomly go up to someone, and hand them something that they exactly need, and they'll just look at her like this. How did you know? She says, my angels. They just tell her what people need, and she spends her own money to supply it most of the time too, which is very generous of her also. Very rarely has she said to me, I need you to pay for this. I always offer, but very rarely. On some occasions I have, if I decided that it was too expensive an item and I didn't want her out of pocket. But that's when you're psychic and you develop an attunement, I call it an attunement with your angels or your spirit guides, how life-saving and how fortuitous and how smoothly life works out for you, because you get told you need to do this. You need to turn left instead of turning right, because if you turn right you're going to be in danger. You get kind of little nudges along the way, and if you fail to obey and hear them and take appropriate action, then your angels have extra work scraping you off some disaster or other that they tried to get you to avoid. But you had free will. You did what you wanted, whatever, and there's consequences, people of Earth. But free will is also very important to honour, so even the angels don't interfere too much with that. But we read earlier last night about the angels that rescued people while it's all literally falling off a cliff. They will intervene if it's necessary. But it's all very interesting, isn't it? But we'll carry on reading from this wonderful book. Martin, Toronto, Canada. My father was diagnosed with cancer of the throat when he was in his 60s. It got quite bad and he was having trouble eating and swallowing. Oh, bless. It's a terrible disease, that. Terrible. He was on medication, and the medication made him feel bad as well. He was very stoic about it, but you could tell he wasn't happy. He had smoked a pipe all his life, and he hated the fact that he had to give it up. Finished all my water. He'd always enjoyed his food and drink, so having those kinds of pleasures taken away from him was very difficult. I hated it when he was ill. He had always seemed so independent and strong, and now he seemed weak and tired. There were difficult moments, such as when he would try to eat a meal and end up being sick. It was horrible for all of us. I believe he felt humiliated as well as unwell. One day he came home looking very happy and told me a strange thing. He said that he had been in the hospital waiting room, waiting for his consultation, when he had met an old man who said he knew a bit about cancer. The man had asked if he could feel his throat. Now my father had no patience for any kind of New Age healing or alternative medicine, but he let this man place his hands on his throat. He said there was a strange warmth that came from his hands. Then the man told him that he would be more comfortable now and not to worry too much. That day, my father ate a much better meal than he had for months. He seemed much better. The day after and the day after that, it was the same. I asked him if he thought the treatment was working. He said no. He thought the treatment was a waste of time. He said he was dying and that it was only a matter of time, but that all he could hope for was to be as comfortable as possible. It's a very hard thing to hear from your father, but I suppose it was his way of coping. He hated false sentimentality and irrationality, and he reacted to illness with the same approach as everything in his life. But he was much better for weeks after he saw that man at the hospital. He didn't talk about it much, but the one other time he mentioned it, he said that whoever he was, he knew a few things that the doctors didn't. He was very comfortable that month and was very talkative and cheerful. When he'd been bad, he had withdrawn into himself a bit, but now he was full of fun and told me lots of anecdotes about his life and my childhood that I hadn't heard before. When he died, it was very unexpected. He was watching ice hockey, something he'd always enjoyed. He'd had a good meal that night and he was pretty happy. Then, just after the end of the match, he had a stroke right there in his chair. It was just like falling asleep. He looked quite happy. It's never good when someone close to you dies, but there are good and bad ways to go, and I think he had a pretty good way. I'm very grateful that that last month was so good, and wonder if it was an angel helping out that gave us that little bit of extra time with him at his best. Janet, Melbourne, Australia. I used to get terrible migraines. I think it was a reaction to stress. But at the time, anything seemed to set them off. Red wine, tea, bright lights, got ants climbing on me, great. Chocolate, you name it. There was nothing I could do when I got them except go and lie down in a darkened room. The pain was terrible, and any movement made me feel sick and dizzy. I used to get a lot of migraines when I was young, in my 30s, but I think it was from the contraceptive pill. I think that was the cause of it. One time I was out shopping when one started to come on. I could feel it building from my temples and gradually starting to take hold. I was upset because I didn't know where I could go. I put down my basket and just walked out of the shop to look for a place to lie down or maybe a taxi to take me home. But outside it was terrible. Sunlight was far too bright, and there was noise and people moving around everywhere. Come on, little ants, you don't need to be biting me. Just go and do your thing in the gut. Goodness. I really thought I might faint from the pain, and I was panicking about what to do. Then a woman walked up to me out of the crowd and said not to worry, she'd look after me. She took my arm and led me back into the shop and into a far corner where there was a bed I could lie down on. She looked a bit like me, but maybe a bit younger. She kept telling me not to worry, and then she put her hands on either side of my face with her fingers on my temples. She said she could make me better. I felt all the tension and pain flowing out of my body. It was incredible. When I woke up, there was a crowd of people all around me in the sunlight. I had actually fainted and fallen on the sidewalk. I'd hit my head, and people were worried that I had hurt myself. My head did hurt a bit where I'd banged it, but the migraine was completely gone. It was a miracle, almost. Excuse me. Extraordinary, anyway. I never get migraines anymore. I sometimes feel the start of one, but I just stay calm and put my fingers to my temples like the woman or angel did, and I feel the pain draining away. Hale, 56, New York, USA. This is something that I witnessed in the late 1970s. It was in the meatpacking district in Manhattan, outside one of those clubs that used to come and go up and down the west side. It was very rough around there then, and I usually had the sense to make sure I left with a friend. But on this occasion, my friend had gone off with a girl and there was no one else I knew. I started walking over toward 10th Avenue when I heard gunshots. I had no idea where they had come from, so I ran in the direction that I thought was away from the shots. But it turned out to be a wrong guess, and I nearly got knocked down by a big car that came shooting around the corner of 10th, off 10th. I ran around the corner in the opposite direction, and in front of me there was a NYPD, which is New York Police Department, car and a small crowd of people on the pavement. I got some of the story that night and some later, but to simplify things, a cop had pulled over the car that had nearly run me down for some minor reason, but the guy was wanted in a serious way, so he just shot first before the cop could work out who he was. The cop, who was out of his car, was hit twice, in the leg and shoulder. It's terrible that something like that should happen to someone who's only doing his job. At the time, all I knew for sure was that the cop had been shot and was lying there on the pavement in a pool of blood. There was a lot of blood. There were people standing around, panicking, or not knowing what to do. Someone had already called the NYPD, so they were on the way. A tall man walked up just as I got there. He knelt down on the ground next to the cop and put his hands over his leg. He stayed there like that and calmly asked someone if there was help coming. They said there was, and he nodded and sighed, as though this was a sad thing, but the kind of thing he saw all the time. It was strange. At the time I wondered if he was a doctor or something. But he didn't examine the cop or anything, just held his leg tightly in his hands. I suspect probably to staunch the flow of blood. I stayed, mainly because I didn't know what else to do, and also because I figured they might need a description of the car, so I should give the cops my number. When the medical team got there, the man stayed holding him like that and spoke to one of the team. I didn't hear it at the time, but afterward the story was that he told them that the cop was shot in the artery and they had to keep holding the wound to keep him from bleeding too heavily. The thing is, they would have worked that out for themselves soon enough, but he couldn't afford to lose much more blood. The man saved him, firstly, by stemming the flow of blood, and secondly, by promptly alerting the medics to his condition. They might otherwise have started by treating the shoulder wound, which looked worse, and missed the leg wound for long enough for him to die. The shoulder wound looked bad, but the bullet had gone straight through and didn't hit any major blood vessels, so by itself it wasn't life-threatening. I talked to the cops, and they took my name, and then we all drifted away, leaving this blood stain on the pavement. The stain was still visible when I walked by 2 weeks later. There was an appeal on the radio. They said that the man who had helped the cop must have been a doctor who was passing, otherwise he would never have had the knowledge to know what to do. But no one seemed to be able to describe him clearly, including me. I just had an impression of his features, but couldn't remember his face. I knew for sure he hadn't done any kind of medical examination. The cop got a medal, and he deserved it for what he had gone through. But the stranger who had saved him never claimed any reward or credit. Of course, he never told anyone who he was, and everyone forgot about it in the end. But who else but an angel could have walked up like that? I want to cry. Seen a man covered in blood with 2 separate wounds, and known exactly what to do without even looking, and which wound to treat? No man could have done that. And the crowd of us there No matter how scared we were and how much we wanted to help, we'd probably have just put him in the recovery position and prayed for the best. He apparently only just saved the cop's life. Even then, a minute more without any help and the cop probably would have been gone. I don't call it a miracle. I call it a revelation or an intervention. The angel must have either known exactly what was going to happen, or he must have been there, ready to help when the guy needed it most. Max, 36, California, USA. About 10 years ago, I was going through a very bad period. I was having anxiety attacks where I couldn't breathe properly, and I'd start to get dizzy with my heart pounding away. It was because of all the mess I was in my life. I had been stealing money at work to try and pay off my debts. I had been doing too many drugs, mostly amphetamines. And also, while I was out of my head, I'd been sleeping around, mostly unsafe sex. And this was at the peak of the spread of AIDS. I'm not a particularly bad person, but I'd been behaving in a very irresponsible and foolish way for too long. I was in so many different kinds of trouble, I didn't know where to start worrying. I tried to put it all out of my head, but then I would just get the anxiety attacks from trying to push it away. One particularly bad day, I went for a walk down into town. It's interesting that I went to say office because I have a sense that my neighbour listens to me from his home office when I read stories in the garden. I'm not sure, but I just had that thought just when I said office. But it's okay, it's harmless. I'm not that loud, I wouldn't be interrupting his work. But anyway, funny that thought just sprung and I changed that word to office. I went into a coffee bar to sit for a while. The place was empty, but then one other person came in, a woman of about my mother's age. She bought herself a coffee and came to sit at the table next to mine, even though there was plenty of empty space. She looked at me and asked if I was all right. I said I was fine, but she just kept talking. She said she could see I wasn't all right. And to be fair, I was sweating, shaking badly. I'd been sitting there, muttering to myself, so anyone could have seen that I wasn't in the best shape. Without being invited, she moved from the table she was sitting at to the table opposite me. She asked me what I was worrying about, and I told her that I was worrying about so many things I wouldn't know where to start worrying. But she insisted, and after a moment of resisting, I found myself telling her everything, even about the drugs and the stealing. There was no reason for me to do this, but I just trusted her. She had such a calm, sensible face, and nothing I said seemed to shock her. It was as though she already knew everything about me, but just needed me to tell her myself. It was a great relief to me to tell someone all this stuff. She didn't give me a great deal of advice. Mostly she told me that these were my problems and I had to work out what to do about them myself. But she did two things that made a real difference. First, she told me to write a list and to think about each problem in isolation. She told me I was getting them all mixed up and thinking there were no solutions simply because there wasn't one big solution. She was right about that. I'd been getting to the point where I was considering running away, getting out of the country to try to start all over again because it all seemed such a mess. Then she did a simple thing. She took my hand and told me that when I was getting anxious, to remember her and stay calm. She told me that should be my mantra until I made at least some of my problems better. I should stop myself from panicking by saying, calm, calm, calm in my head. While she told me this, she was holding my hand, and this was the most mystical thing about the conversation. I could feel her strength flowing into me as she spoke. There was a kind of warmth that started in my hand and spread right through me. I could feel myself calming down even as we talked. Then she told me again that it was up to me and left. I realized I wanted to ask her more questions, so I ran after her just after she went through the door. But she was gone. So I went back to my coffee. I could still feel her warmth on the back of my hand. I did exactly what she said. It's not often that someone can have such an impact on you, pardon me. But on this occasion, I just knew that she was a messenger of some kind in my life and that I was being given a real opportunity. I separated all the problems out in my mind and dealt with each in turn. I stopped stealing and took on extra work to try and clear my debts. I stopped taking the drugs, which helped a lot with money, and I got myself tested for HIV. Happily, it was negative. I could easily have been less lucky. Gradually, the anxiety attacks started to go away. Every time I got anxious about money or found myself wanting to go off my head and do something stupid, I remembered her holding my hand and I made myself be calm like she had said. To this day, I can close my eyes if I have a problem and feel the warmth and strength of her hand on mine as though she is still there. Don't get me wrong, I didn't become a saint overnight. It wasn't a total religious conversion, because that just isn't me. But from a low point in my life, I learned how to improve my life little by little, and how to be more considerate and reasonable in my behaviour. And I think that made a real difference to my life. In a way, I think that she may have been there more for the sake of the people around me, people I was hurting, than she was for me in particular. I really didn't deserve her help, but by helping me, she helped others too. Amen to that, sister or brother. It's often the case. Roger, 54, Liverpool, England. I think I once saw an angel at an accident scene on the other side of the road. I do a lot of driving as part of my job. I'm a sales rep for a medical supplies company on Merseyside. I was halfway through a long journey a few months ago when all the traffic on the motorway started to slow right down. It's not unusual for that to happen, and it's usually for no reason, and everything picks up a few miles on. Sometimes it's roadworks, and occasionally, unfortunately, it's because there's been an accident in the opposite lanes, and people are slowing down to see what's going on. I fucking hate that. Fucking ghouls with goggleitis. So disrespectful. Here he writes, and I agree with him too. I don't know why they do it. It's pretty ghoulish, and I always try not to look. Me too. This time, the cars in front of me had come to an almost complete stop just as I was opposite the place where the accident had happened. I couldn't help glancing over. It looked as if a car and a motorbike had hit each other. The car was dented and in the middle of the lane, and the bike was lying on its side about 30 yards away. An ambulance was there, and a couple of people who seemed a bit shaken up, with blankets around their shoulders, were standing next to it. I presumed that they had been in the car, and they didn't look as if they'd been badly hurt. Cookie's here. Hello, Kookaburra. Two of them now. Hello, boys. The motorcyclist was lying on a stretcher on the road, still with his helmet on. Did you just poo on my washing? Oh, you cheeky bird. Sometimes they do that. Sorry, still with his helmet on, while one of the paramedics was doing something to the neck brace they'd put him in, and what I thought was another paramedic was crouched beside the stretcher. I couldn't quite make out his features, even though I was pretty close. I thought for a minute that there must still have been some smoke drifting around from the collision. But when I looked to see where it might be coming from, I realised that there wasn't any smoke at all. The first paramedic went over to the ambulance, and I was able to see that the other one was more like a misty shape than a solid person. He seemed to be somehow lit from inside his body. I actually did that thing of closing my eyes and pinching myself, wondering if I'd had too much coffee. But when I looked again, the figure was still there with his hand on the motorcyclist's forehead. Just then, the paramedic came back with his partner, who apparently had been looking after the people from the car. They lifted the stretcher and started to take it to the ambulance. The motorcyclist reached out his hand to the misty figure, and the paramedics, who were clearly not aware of any other presence, tried to make him put it down. It was all right though, because the figure, which I was by now sure was an angel, stayed alongside the injured man, even though he didn't really seem to move. I was just able to see the stretcher go into the ambulance with the angel right next to it when the traffic started to move forward again. The last thing I saw was the light from the angel filling the interior of the ambulance as the doors closed. As I drove off, instead of feeling a bit sick like I normally do when I see an accident, I felt oddly happy and sure that the motorcyclist would recover, however badly hurt he might have been. I'm certain that there was an angel taking care of him. Matthew 59, London, England. I saw a man die in a car accident once. It was on a road near to where I live. I saw the whole thing. I saw 2 little boys die in a car accident out the front of our house when I was 14. And there was a kind of angelic intervention, because just after they were thrown off the back of the ute and hit their heads on the road, and one was hemorrhaging badly, he was the first to die. I knew they were both going to die. I was with my mother, tending to them as best as we could. But the first car that came along about 2 or 3 minutes after they impacted with the road was a registered nurse. So she got out and she stayed with the other boy, and my mother tended to the first boy. And I was there when he died. His whole face lit up, and he just looked up as if he'd seen the most exquisite, beautiful sight. His whole face lit up like a golden glow, and then his eyes just rolled back in his head and he died. My mother said to me, "There you go, Tanya." An angel came for him to claim him. And the other boy died in the nurse's arms. It was one of the most astonishing experiences of my life, watching that boy leave his body, leave his earthly existence. And the odd thing was, that boy's mother was an atheist. So there was a funeral, and they put out that there were to be no flowers and there was going to be no religious service. And my mother hesitated about whether she was going to attend the funeral, but she thought it was family only. But she felt she should be there because the boy had, died on her watch, that she was with him when he died. And the nurse that was there for the second boy had the same dilemma. But anyway, my mother went to that funeral, but she just stood sort of further away. She had a little posy of flowers in her hand. She just stood there, planning to observe the funeral from a distance, because she felt it was a mark of honour to be there, since hers was the last face that boy looked at when he died. And she tended to him. She'd sent me actually upstairs to make cups of tea for all the other shocked and mildly injured kids. There was about 10 of them in the back of that flat tray. The 2 that hit first were the ones that died. But anyway, so my mother says to me, she said, I'm going to that funeral, come hell or high water, but I'll respect the parents' wishes. I'll just keep myself distant. And I nodded. Anyway, just as the funeral was about to begin, the mother, who was a professed atheist and had not wanted any religious or spiritual things at that funeral, saw my mother waiting at a distance and went over to her. She said, "You're welcome at this funeral, Mrs. Phillips," she said. "When my son died, you were there for him, like a mother. And so I acknowledge you as one mother to another mother. You're welcome to come and be with us for my son's funeral." And my mother cried and cried and cried. Street angel, home devil, of course. She was quite capable of being very spiritual, angelic and loving to other people's children, especially when that one gave up his life. She was very good to him. Oh, the irony. But she said to me, that woman, the mother of the boy, said to her, "I've been an atheist all my life, not believed in God or the supernatural." But she said, I know you were there for my son at the point of his death. And I believe you when you say he saw something." And my mother nodded. She said, "He didn't die alone. Something so beautiful came for him. I saw his whole face light up in ecstasy and in recognition." And the mother just clutched my mother's hand and she said, "Thank you. You've given me peace." So it's a very tragic and upsetting story, but in a sense, had a beautiful message to it. Anyway, I'll carry on with the story. He walked out at the same time as a blue car came out of a side road far too fast. He was holding a mobile phone, and I suppose he was distracted, but the driver was at fault. The driver didn't even stop. He must have known what happened, because the man went up onto the windscreen and was thrown onto the pavement. But the driver just accelerated and drove away. Someone got the license plates, but the car was found abandoned later. It was probably someone dodgy without insurance, so they couldn't track him down. The man who had been hit was lying there on the pavement. He had been hit hard in the hip and torso, and had hit his head hard on the pavement when he landed. There were about 5 of us there, and we all ran over. A few drivers stopped as well. Someone called an ambulance. It was a horrible situation. My heart was beating fast with adrenaline, but I wasn't sure what to do. No one else knew what to do either. Obviously, none of us knew much about first aid, but I did know that it was a bad idea to move him if he had neck or head injuries. I was asking him how he was, and he looked up at me as though he was conscious, but he couldn't talk. I honestly thought he would be all right once the ambulance got there. He wasn't bleeding or obviously wounded, even though he had hit his head. It didn't seem like the sort of thing that could kill you, but I suppose these things are a matter of luck. We were just all standing there feeling impotent because we couldn't help. Then this girl walked past me. She was quite young and didn't look like she was from the area. She just knelt down beside him and started to stroke his hair. She leaned down and whispered in his ear, and he smiled at her. She was there for about a minute, doing that, as we all watched. She wasn't doing any first aid or anything, just comforting him and whispering to him. And it seemed to help. Then he gave a big shudder and closed his eyes. The girl stood up and said that he was dead. She didn't check his pulse or breathing. She just calmly said it, and she apologized to us, saying she was sorry we'd been there and not to worry. We couldn't have helped him. I remember that she was very calm and seemed to know for a fact that he was dead and that there was nothing anyone could have done. Then the ambulance arrived and people started running around. Someone was asking me about the crash and if I'd seen the driver. When I looked around for the girl, she was gone. Looking back, it was a very strange scene. The five of us standing around and her just stroking his hair like that. If she had been a doctor or nurse or something, I feel like she would have been doing checks on him. But it was as though she knew he was dying, and all she could do was comfort and soothe him. And she seemed to succeed in doing that. Personally, I think she was the angel who came for him when he died, and that after he died, she escorted him to somewhere else. That may be too much of an assumption on my part, but she looked like an angel and didn't behave like any person I'd ever met. You would think that even if angels can't rescue you from death, they might be there to meet you when you go. It's partly seeing someone die in front of you and partly the strangeness of the girl, but I found myself seeing life very differently after that experience. I felt much more aware that we could die at any time, but also less scared of it than I used to be. Right, this concludes today's reading. Tomorrow I'll come back. Someone's turned a little page down here. The story's about someone describing an affair. It must have been meaningful to whoever previously read this book. The next chapter is called When Angels Intervene. It's also quite a long chapter, so may require 2 or possibly 3 videos. think 3, given it's much longer than the Healing Angels chapter by the gods. And anyway, I'll begin reading that for you tomorrow. People of Earth, all sentient beings, all interdimensional entities of love, light, truth, peace, healing, integrity, honour, prosperity, comfort and ease. Blessed be from my sacred space to your sacred space. Have a beautiful day wherever you are in the space-time continuum, and remember, we are never alone. Never. Not really. Bye for now, people of Earth. Take good care. Be of good cheer. Blessed be.